I am truly humbled, honored and excited actually, to be sitting together with three world-class leaders today. In no particular orders, I'm joined today with the first speaker, who is one of Innovate's Finance's most powerful women in fintech, an investor and a compliance and ethics expert who assumed leadership positions at billion-dollar companies like Apple, Stripe, and TrueLayer. The second speaker, an early pioneer in the organizational alignment of profit with purpose, and a former director at one of the largest social investors in the UK, who currently leads an organization supporting institutions such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rhodes Trust. And last but certainly not least, a serial entrepreneur and one of the Times Magazine 100 most influential people in the world, who is on a mission to develop 3 million African leaders. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Shefali Roy, Vinay Nair, and friend Swaniker to the stage. Well, thanks so much for coming, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Delighted to have you. And I guess everyone who maybe not have a particular background in impact investing or values-based investing are curious to know really what are we talking about. Does that just negative screening of not investing in things that might be bad, or does it go beyond that? And I would love, Vinay, if you would just help us lay the foundation of what are we talking about today in terms of values-based investing and advancing technology.
Of course. Well, thank you, Amer. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful day already, and looking forward to that. It's a right place to start, and you kind of wonder, why are we framing it of values-based investing and non-values-based? Like, shouldn't everything be value-based investing? And let's default to that, and actually other investment should be called, I don't know, bad investing, or so I find it funny that the framing is still that way. And your question is a nice one, Amer. And the evolution, I think, of this space has been incredibly rapid, that it even became a hot button issue at the midterms. It got to the point that even institutions like BlackRock, with trillions of dollars of assets under management, were being called woke by the Republican Party for doing different forms of ESG investing. I'll talk about that acronym in a moment. But a lot of the genesis of values-based investing did start with kind of negative screening, meaning you look at, and we're not going to invest in tobacco or in fossil fuels and so on. But slowly a sense of what's known as intentionality, the positive, deliberate intention to vote in impactful companies, started evolving, and a language started emerging as well. ESG, which is an acronym probably many of you now are coming across, if not all of you, around environmental, social, and governance. Again, I would argue, why isn't every company, why isn't everything screening on that? But that's a really important evolution, and we've seen various elements coming from that. And there's no agreed language around what does values-based ESG investing, impact investing necessarily mean, and we can discuss that a little bit more. But really that idea of intentionality, trying to not just look at a financial return, but also the social and environmental impact. And a couple of considerations that come with that. One is around the correlation of those different outcomes. Is there a trade-off? Is it actually positively correlated that if you make the financial return, that you actually then can make a commensurate social and environmental impact? And that's something I think in the values-based investing, people can often get caught up in exactly what that means. And finally, it's a sense of, well, and we heard a little bit about it this morning, well, what gets measured gets done. So actually when we talk about impact or values, whose values, what does impact mean? How do we measure it? How do we know we're doing it? So really that idea of intentionality, aligning the financial returns with social and environmental impact, and understanding what that actually means when you define it is really how I think about values-based investing.
And that sounds really interesting, what you mentioned. Whose values, right, are we talking about? People come with their biases and spectrums of ethics and what do they deem to be valued or not. I think, Shefali, do you think that that's a good thing, that people would come with these spectrums? And where does bias play into the whole values aspect of things?
I think you have to have ethic and value if you're building a business, or you're starting a business, or you're an employee in a business. And if you don't have it, get them quickly. And if you're working for people who don't have it, ask them why. But it's very important because ultimately, I've always worked in businesses that have led with let's do things for the right thing, and let's do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's important. I say that having worked in investment banking. So, it's almost like a dichotomy, really, of doing the right thing and then making money. But I think if you don't have that, how many of you are current students? Okay, and how many of you are working? Oof, okay, good luck. So you should be asking these questions of your employees, your employers, and your colleagues, and your peers, and your managers. You should be knowing what they stand for and what your business stands for and why you're doing it. So for me, whether I've been working with people or I hire people or I invest in people, we do ask the question. We do look at their bias. We do ask the question and evaluate where they stand on certain issues. One of the questions I ask when I invest in someone is, well, I don't ask it, but I try to ascertain, for me, are you a nice person? It matters to me that I invest and work with people who are nice people. It matters to me that I, as an investor, invest in a human being who actually wants to build good businesses, wants to solve a problem, wants to make money, but also wants to have a positive impact on the planet. We are a venture firm, so we also take money from people to invest in others. But also on the upside, it's very much where we take money from. You have to ask them, well, what is your ethos and what's your value base and are you ethical? We've turned down money from people who are not and who we didn't feel comfortable with, but it matters a great deal. And so, Amer, to your point, I think if you're not asking the question, then I think you better start asking it. Because also this is a culture where if we just let it go and we are just complacent and lazy about these things, the world becomes a very unpleasant place to be.
That is true indeed. And I think values in particular could be a really drive and a motivation for many entrepreneurs or leaders in the tech industry. I mean, the three of you here have inspiring and humbling experience. Vinay, you left JP Morgan to go to try to solve equity, justice, and alleviate poverty. Shefali, you didn't hesitate to turn down very lucrative offers in Switzerland with some banks that didn't align with your values, right? But I think what also strikes me the most, Fred, is with your experience, you left a very stable career, a very secure path towards a comfortable life. Many people were questioning your decision back then when you decided to go and start the educational institution that you went after back then. Was that driven by values, or was it the entrepreneurial bug in particular?
I think it's a bit of both. If you look at what really drives most entrepreneurs, they're not driven by making money. They want to solve problems that they see in society, and the money tends to be a byproduct of that. So Bill Gates really wanted to make people's lives more efficient and effective. That's what drove him. He wanted to solve that problem. And Mark Zuckerberg wanted to connect communities. Now, you may wonder what's happened since then, but at least his original motivation was to try and create community and so forth. Right? So most entrepreneurs are driven by that. And I was with McKinsey and had grown up all across the continent of Africa, and I'd seen that Africa had tremendous potential. But what was holding us back was the lack of human capital. And we needed leaders and entrepreneurs who could solve our big challenges. So, instead of just hoping that we get good leaders by accident, I thought, could we actually manufacture the leaders that we need and actually develop them in a more deliberate way? And so, wrote the business plan for something called the African Leadership Academy when I was doing my MBA at Stanford. And McKinsey had sponsored me to do the MBA. So I had to decide, do I go back and work for 2 years or follow my dream? And in doing so, I had to pay them $120,000. And they gave me 2 months to do it. So that was a very interesting situation. I had to learn how to fundraise very quickly. That was my first experience fundraising. And then, a lot of people thought, I had lost my mind. My mother didn't talk to me for 2 years. She called all my relatives and said, this guy's gone crazy. He had a stable job at McKinsey. Why did he decide to do this thing? But ultimately, what drives entrepreneurs is that, you want to solve this problem. So, fast forward, started the African Leadership Academy, the African Leadership University, and now today we have something called ALX. What we're doing with all of these is essentially, for what drives me as relates to this conversation, is I believe that you can't have values-based investment without values-based entrepreneurs. So I want to create those entrepreneurs who are driven by solving problems for society. And so we find young people who are passionate about solving problems like healthcare, climate change, bringing energy to underserved areas, creating logistic solutions for people in underserved areas, whatever it is. And then we infuse them with the skills that they need to become these entrepreneurs. And then more importantly, the mindsets and the values, right, to do that. So today we are training, about 100,000 software engineers in Africa. But our training starts first with 6 months of leadership and ethics and values training, so that before you become a software engineer or a data scientist or a cloud computing, before you build that AI, you actually have a sense of some of the ethical implications of that software you're building and some of the decisions an AI might make, so that you embed into the technology that you're creating a better purpose for society.
And that's fascinating. And I think it is such a great way of fostering values before actually going after a startup. But I mean, if I may be the devil's advocate, running a startup is very tough. Fundraising is very tough. And when these entrepreneurs, embedded with good values, go and want to build successful companies, at the end of the day, they're faced with stakeholders, fundraising milestones that need to be met. Do you think that there is something we can do really to challenge that really vicious cycle and try to have a more... Is it true that patient capital exists, or are we just talking...
Does anyone think Amer has personal
ideals?
experience in this?
Or are we talking about ideals here? And it's really tough when it comes to the reality of the world. Can we do something about that?
Yeah, I absolutely believe you can. I mean, for the entrepreneur, it starts with a couple of things. Right? First, you have to be values-driven yourself, right? Secondly, one thing that I've found is that you have to align yourself with the right investors. And then the third thing is, I say, you need to have alternatives. So I have, in the course of my last 20 years, I've given back $21 million of investment capital to investors because they didn't align with my values.
We should talk after the conference.
Right? The first case was for $1 million, the second case was for $15 million, the second case was for $5 million. And in all cases, we agree on what we're going to do, and then the investment comes in, but then the investors wanted to push us in a direction that did not align with our values, and we gave the money back. And the reason I was able to do that is because we had alternatives. If you don't have alternatives, you'll be pushed against the wall when that investor is pushing you against your values, and you've got to be able to walk away. And that's why it is possible. But you have to, structure, partner with the right people, and then also have these alternatives that allows you to stick to your values when you get into that tough corner.
Yeah. Shefali, you've been an investor as an angel. Now you're setting up a VC with First Look. What do you look in founders and in companies when you're deciding on your investment?
So I should say we invest in four verticals. We invest in finance, health, the future of work, and in real estate. And it's the tech lens of those four verticals. The most important criteria of that, though, is that the founder team has to have at least one woman or a man or woman from a diverse background. And for us, diversity is gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. So if you've got those two things, then talk to us and we'll think about giving you some money. But part of that due diligence, Amer, is very much, okay, as to Fred's point, are you solving a problem? Is there a solution? Is it a viable solution? Is it scalable? Is it buildable? Is it sellable? Is it monetizable? Great, wonderful, fantastic. But then you kind of look, when you look at founders, I get about 20 deals a week. And of the 20 deals a week, I would say about 16 of them are duds. I mean, they're pretty bad. They're pretty awful. And you kind of go, gosh, I can't believe someone thought this was not only just a good idea, but I thought you think it's good enough that you're going to go to someone and say, hey, can you give me $10 for it? I mean, they're pretty awful. So when you have to look at investing and you have to look at such an early stage, we invest very, very early. We do pre-seed to A. And so pre-seed could also mean it's totally experimental. There's no product, there's no thing, there's nothing. It's a total bonkers idea, and the founders have enough gravitas and knowledge to bring that idea to fruition and to market, and they'll raise some money and then build a product and put it out there. So then we invest in things that are earning, 50 grand a month. So the spectrum of what we invest in is quite large. However, when we look to your question about how do we look at investment, a lot of it at that early stage is founders, right? And looking at that founding team and seeing if you have an idea of what you're building, you have an understanding of your market, understanding of your customer. I talk to so many founders every week when they talk about pitching, and my first question is, who's your customer? You'd be surprised at how many people don't know who their customer is. And I'm like, well, what are you building for and why are you building it? So understanding those basic questions and understanding those basic sort of ideas of what you want to build your business around is very, very important. How you build a team and all that sort of stuff comes later. And then the other thing we do when we invest such an early stage is because it's so early in terms of product or market or it's experimental, a lot of it goes on founder and who are you as a human being. And so we spend a bit of time with you. In my career, I've spent a lot of time working with people, managing people, and so you kind of, you get to discern certain individuals sooner rather than later. And a lot of those questions are about their intellect, but also about their values, their ethic, their morality, how they treat people, how they're going to treat me, how they treat their employees. We ask those questions very early on. And very early on, you also get to understand that some of them are just really poor, right, in terms of ethical value system, personality, and character. And that makes a difference. And so when we look at this, it's, I kind of do something called, I do a walk and talk. Because when you're not in an interview session, but when you're having a coffee with someone or a chai with someone, it's quite amazing how they implode. Like, it's true. Like, if you go and have a chat with someone and you're all very casual and everyone's having a lovely little setting, you then get to ask them some really sort of tweaky little questions, and a lot of their true personality comes out, and you're like, far out, I'm not going to invest $1 in you, let alone $1 million in you. But you have to do that because also, remember, I'm responsible for other people's money. My fiduciary obligations are to my investors, and then it's to your business and to those founders and those teams. And so as part of that due diligence, as I was saying in one of the earlier questions, it does matter to me that you're a nice human being. It does matter to me that you have a value set and you have a spine and you're able to articulate what that is. And so there are a number of things, and as you build your business and it's a later stage, then it's just numbers. The numbers should work, so learn your macros and learn Excel. But it's important because at some point you've built your product and it's out there and it's being sold and you're earning some money, and now I kind of need to go, well, is it going to be a rocket ship, and do I want to put more money in it, right? So at some point the due diligence pivots from human being, business, personality type of leader to do the numbers add up. So it's a sort of a range of things to do and look at, but the early bits are the fun bits, and so I kind of love investing early stage because I love having coffees with people, but it's also quite interesting to see them unravel.
Well, I heard from people in VC that they say their job is the best job in the world. They get to meet and hang out with really cool people and occasionally give them checks.
Yeah, but like most VCs don't know what they're doing. I mean, they don't, because they've never built a business, right? So for those of you who are going to build your own businesses at some point, you all should think about this. And at the moment in Europe, and that's why we really have started our VC, but in Europe at the moment, and this is a massive sweeping generalization, I should say, but in my experience, having raised money for companies that I've worked with and now sitting on the other side of the table, most VCs in Europe are bankers and consultants. They've never run a business, they've never been in a business, and they went from university to Deutsche Bank, and then they went to LBS, and Then they went to VC. And so they've never really been in the trenches. And I know that from personal experience that when I was in early stage companies, most of my investors who were fabulous, they're brilliant, lovely people, but never actually been in business. So if I was in the trenches, they were just handing me the shovel. I was like, that's nice. I mean, I can get my own shovel, thanks very much. But what else can you help me with? And so if you are going to do that and be entrepreneurs and build your own businesses, choose investors who are not just value aligned with you, but who know how to run a business and who know the pain. And Amer, you're doing this right now, like you're raising money and trying to build your firm. It's hard stuff. It's really, really hard. And just sending, HBR articles about how to look at money is really not the most helpful thing.
That is true indeed. And I guess maybe not only VCs could be enablers, some would argue actually that NGOs have a role to play in this space. I'm a big fan of what the Rhodes Trust has done with the things like the service year model, for example, where they do actually give you capital and support you to go and solve a real world problem. Vinay, I would love to hear your thoughts on that space since you are now very active in it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you asked the question, and I think like we've had in some of the earlier panels, particularly in the previous one, that centering around justice and equity should be in all our conversations, in all our panels, in all our thoughts. And if we are to try and step up with all these interlocking crises that are happening, I think that's vital. And I think NGOs are a vital part of that ability to bring the voice of vulnerable, poor, marginalized people in the UK. We're seeing it in the global north, in the global south as well. I think that NGO sector is quite an interesting and evolving one when it comes to values-led technology, or just even actually in terms of delivering goods and services around the world. I previously worked for several years at Acumen Fund that works across East and West Africa, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and we saw a lot of innovation happening there. I think that the title can sometimes be a little bit limiting. NGO, charity, actually you're looking for handouts, as opposed to actually doing some of the most important work in the world. So I think there are a lot of examples of high impact-oriented organizations that are impact-oriented that are doing a lot of really important work, whether it's Barefoot College, whether it's the Rhodes Trust, as you say. So some of the work that the Trust does, you heard about the Fellowship of Fellowships earlier, the service here that you're talking about as well, actually giving that experiential understanding, building authentic empathy. It needn't come from working for a charity. That's actually quite valuable in truth. But actually it's again about not just the what, it's the how. And I think therefore NGOs, what we're seeing right across the world is the ability to both come up with innovative solutions, find effective partnerships. When I worked at Acumen, we had a line that we'd say that charities and nonprofits governments rarely invent solutions, but they can scale what works. So actually not seeing government as the enemy. I know we had a comment from somebody saying in Africa, both the markets and the government lack trust. So actually trying to understand those interplays, and I think civil society plays a really, really important role in that. And so I think the NGO voice in their own right is important, but I would say moreover, it's the voice of who they're representing and channeling to be in the heart of those conversations before the algorithm gets written, to understand that there's examples of when an iPhone gets cold or is interesting in Norway, but think about the amount of examples that exist across the global south. And so I think for me, that's where we're seeing a lot of impact. And I would encourage us all to continue to not just think business, the citizen, and government, but actually recognize civil society as a key part as well.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. And it's such an important point. And I guess I want to go back also to Fred and pick up on a thread that he touched upon a bit. Because yes, we can provide support, we can provide capital to entrepreneurs and social movers, right? They want to do change, but the journey is very long. And I know you mentioned, Fred, that you are setting an institution to educate people on values before they go out and try to solve these real problems. You are educating now, prepping engineers to go solve these problems. But do you think there is another medium of support that extends beyond the prepping and the induction of capital along the journey? And what would that be, actually?
One of the things that we believe in the work that we do in the African leadership groups, that leadership development is not a short-term project. It takes a very long time. It takes a lifetime to become a leader. You're always growing and developing. So if you go through a program for 6 months and you think you're a leader, you're not ready, right? So that's why what the Rhodes Scholarship is doing with the fellowship, the lifelong fellowship, I think is so important, right? You have to keep nurturing someone and supporting them through this different stage of their life. So in addition to training and mindset change is just the very beginning of your journey as a leader or as an entrepreneur or as a change agent. So, in addition to getting academic training like you might get at Oxford or, going for this fellowship or that fellowship and, learning about ethics and values and so forth, more importantly, you have to put into practice. And that's where the real learning comes. They talk about, the Center for Creative Leadership in the US did research to understand what had led to the development of different leaders. And they attributed only 10% of their growth and development as leaders to classroom learning. 20% came from what they call developmental relationships with their mentors and peers and coaches. 70% came from experience. We learn best by doing. So you have to find ways to get that experience, to try your first startup. You'll fail, you learn from it. Your second one, your third one, and you get better and better over time, right? So those real-world experiences of being in the trenches, digging and failing and struggling, and that's how you're going to grow and learn. And so what you then need to do is to support people with a network that will allow them to make sense of those experiences, and also that will cushion them sometimes when they fall and support them. Sometimes it's just a shoulder to cry on, whatever it is, right? So that people will keep going. And one of the most important, so that includes board members, advisors, the right investors, someone who might open doors for you to your first customer. And also critically important is talent, right? Can you build great teams around you? Can you partner? Because as an individual, you will inherently be flawed. There are many, many things that you'll not be good at. And so can you be self-aware enough to know what you're good at, and therefore who do you need to surround yourself with so that you can actually thrive and succeed?
Thank you so much. It's such an important point, and stressing on the journey of it and how it's an unending journey, actually. I can't agree more with that. I guess I want to kind of just challenge a little bit values-based investing, because a lot of the talk we see around ESG now, let's say these leaders, right, they're going on the journey and then they're hit with the struggles, and they're trying to live up to these ESG movements. Have we seen really good examples that we can aspire to and learn from your experience, Vinay? Would you share with us a couple of organizations, movements, NGOs maybe perhaps that we could look up to? I know we have a bunch in the room, but maybe...
Yeah, I mean, is this what I'm meant to plug what you do? No. But I'll happily do that. I'm very happy to recognize that the ESG movement, as maybe it has become, is getting criticism, because I think it deserves it. The concept of greenwashing often came from this. Now we have sports washing coming up to Qatar and so on. So I think conceptually, I think it's very important that we just don't sort of get starry-eyed and Pollyanna about it, but actually recognize this is hard work across the board, whether you're an LP, whether you're a GP, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a social entrepreneur, whether you're a nonprofit leader, whoever it is working. So I think that there is, I think it, like anything, when it becomes a little bit frothy, there's a lot more sizzle than there is steak. So I think a key aspect is to look through to see the substance of what's underneath a lot of the noise that exists. That said, I think it's really welcome that this is a frame, that actually we are talking about this and that there's a recognition, and we heard a little bit on the climate emergency earlier, that these are really pressing and urgent needs, and financial capital is an absolutely critical part of it. By no means the only one, and you heard Fred passionately talk about people, human capital, teams, etc. But in the question that you asked me around values-based investing, I think being able to understand, ask the questions, your fiduciary duty to your limited partners, they're the ones who are actually often saying to the general partners that they're investing in, hey, tell me about what you're actually doing here. So actually it goes all the way up and down the kind of financial chain to get some accountability on actually, is there something substance here around it? There are quite a few examples of great organizations. So you mentioned trusts and foundations, obviously the Rhodes Trust, you mentioned we work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You see a lot of program-related, mission-related investing that's happening. So much more aligning endowments with the programmatic objectives and purpose of that organization and getting all of that to actually stream together. We're seeing universities now increasingly doing that as well. We're seeing large asset managers in the UK, on continental Europe, across the US, that are starting, Legal & General, for example, huge, that has a big insurance and pension backing, that are really kind of making it the default, rather than sort of saying it's an opt-in, you kind of have to opt out of it as well. So you're seeing large asset managers that are doing it as well. And you are seeing more kind of disruptive, new, although they might have been going for a while now, first look capital, like, kind of, isn't it great that you ask, tell us about your co-founder team. What is that thing? And again, the question that's putting you out there should actually, wouldn't it be nice that we move? And I think we're seeing a lot of non-profit impact funds, for-profit impact funds that don't even use the label. I don't think you do you, Shefali, of impact funds actually moving it. So I think there's a plethora of high-quality examples to whom we can look to, listen to, and then actually seek their leadership and push them to go even further.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think I want to merge two lines. One is, it seems that it's boiling down to the values and ethics of individuals at the end, right, who are driving the mission, and then it's the continuity of that journey. And Shefali, you've been in startups, you work in a pretty legal and compliance roles. We don't get taught ethics and values in school. I mean, Fred has an incredible initiative that is addressing that, but can we embed that in cultures, in startups, in organizations, and how we can go about that?
I think you have to, and I think that's why you have the power to kind of say, well, this is what the companies I'm going to work for, and this is what I'm aligned with, and this is why I want to do it. So it's very cheesy for me to say, your ethic and your morals start at home, but they do. And I have very good friends who I've known for donkey's years, who if I do something stupid, I get told very quickly that I'm an idiot. So I've surrounded myself with people who value me as a human being and love and care enough about me to tell me when I do stupid stuff. And I would imagine you have those people in your life as well. But you take that continuity and you take that to your business and to your companies that you work with, whether you're a manager or you're an employee or you're just working in a business, to kind of say, well, this is what I stand for, and therefore this is who I am. And if it doesn't align, you need to walk, and you need to be brave enough to walk. And the other thing about walking is there will always be another job. Like, there's infinite jobs out there. So I wouldn't be worried about, oh gosh, if I have to leave my company and I leave my job in this very fancy title with some very fancy money, I'm not going to get a job somewhere else. There will always be a job. But your integrity and what you stand for and who you are and your word can't be replaced, nor can it be malleable to the point where you just move with the wind. I mean, that just can't be right. So I'll just give you a quick example. When I interview people, when I used to hire people for my people in my team, depending on what role you asked for, I asked specific, very provocative questions. So if I was talking to someone in HR and I wanted to hire someone in HR, I would say, what are your thoughts about bullying? Because I think bullying is quite okay. Now, if you're a head of HR and you're like, actually, yeah, maybe Shefali, because bullying is a spectrum, get out. Okay? So then I talk to someone in finance, I would go, I think it's okay to bribe people to get things done faster. And if you have a finance person who goes, well, I guess, like, get out. So you have to ask those questions and you have to kind of root them in so that you know. And the reason I ask those questions is because as a business person or a leader or a manager, I can't be everywhere. So I need you to be and hold the line and set the value and set the tone when I'm not in the room, because I can't be everywhere. And so if I don't trust my own people, there's no way my clients are going to trust you. There's no way investors are going to trust you. There's no way your people who you're going to manage ultimately are going to trust you. And so throughout that value chain, I failed. So I don't have that luxury, and I don't have, and the cost of correction. not in paying a fine to a regulator because I was stupid, but in hiring new people, in training them, in giving them trust and respect and dignity at a workplace gets exponentially harder if tone at the top is rubbish. And so you have to start very, very early on. You have to embed that very, very early. So if you're being hired, you need to ask the questions. And if you're hiring, you need to ask the questions. But you have to ask it because you gotta need to know who you're getting in bed with, you know.
Thank you so much for the advice. I want to take a pause. It's been very exciting and interesting, but we'll take a pause to allow our audience to ask some questions if they would like. I see some hands over here. Very quick hand.
Thank you so much. It's been really, really insightful. Specifically to Fred, I know the good work ALA has done. I grew up in Nigeria and have a bunch of friends who've gone there, and they're living great lives now thanks to ALA. I personally got rejected, but that's not the question I want to talk about today. So my question is about where do you draw the line between kind of going at things from a value-based perspective, but also not ending up in an echo chamber, right? How do you ensure that you're still, if values drive what you're doing and you have a really strong set of values, that you're still analyzing and assessing other perspectives that might not necessarily be aligned with your values?
That's a very good question. And are you a Rhodes Scholar now?
No, I went to UWC.
Oh, you went to UWC. Okay. Great. Well, see, you still ended up great. So that's an excellent question. I think it really boils down to, I would say, two things. Number one, surrounding yourself with people who disagree with you, and ensuring that you don't really pay lip service to diversity, but you truly value it. So you have to make sure that there are diverse viewpoints around you on your team, on your board, and whatever. So, Rhodes talks about unlike-mindedness, right? You want people who are different in thought to you, and in gender, and in nation, whatever, because they bring different perspectives and allow you to make better decisions, right? And so that's the one thing. So if you are hiring people that only look like you, that think like you, and everything, you're just heading down over a cliff. You're going to make some bad decisions. The other thing I would say is making sure that you don't believe your own hype. So, when you are when you're a founder, you're used to selling a story and telling, something, your mission and so forth. And sometimes the more successful you get, the more things are written about you and whatever. And so it's very easy to just believe that thing. And then you see you're living in this world and it's a very different world from the reality. And a lot of very successful leaders get to a point where no one tells them the truth. And then they read their own media and everything. So one of the things that I do practically is I don't read much media. If I give an interview to a newspaper or a podcast or whatever, I will never read the article. Because the article always sound good. Usually, it talks about all the successes normally. But meanwhile, there's all these failures, all these challenges. So if you keep reading all those things, you think life is good and whatever. And so I think it's important to ground yourself and to stay humble by not believing your own hype.
Actually, on a practical level, I kind of hire people opposite to me, particularly for exactly the reason Fred's just said, which is if you have people who are very like-minded to you, then you'll all think the same thing. So I try and actively hire people who went to schools that were not mine. Or I'm an economist and I did law, so I try and hire people who I work with who are anthropologists or mathematicians or scientists, because you get a really, really lovely perspective that is not yours. And you don't have that historical legacy of all of you all are the same and you all look the same and you all breathe the same and you all think the same. You don't have that, because when you then come from a different sector or a different environment, you come with different perspectives. And so I kind of love that. And then I always also when I've always managed a team, I've tried to manage 3 layers down. And so at any point in time, my idea was you have to know 3 levels down from you what is actually happening in your organization, because your direct reports, in that sense, they kind of love you. And their performance review and their equity is all dependent on how much you love them, right? But if you manage 3 people down, 3 layers down, you always get from those employees, what is actually happening in the organization. And you do create an environment of safety and respect when you do that, because people might be nervous about telling, the CEO, the CEO, or whatever, I don't want to tell you this, Shefali, because you're my boss's boss's boss. Sure, but I need to know because maybe your boss's boss is a bit of a dill and we need to figure something out. And I don't know because they're so lovely to me. So when you do that, and I learned that at Apple actually, when you do that and you manage 3-4 layers down, you get this really lovely sense of a pulse of a team, but also a pulse horizontally of an organization or a location, depending on where you are. Because we live in global times and work in global teams. And so understanding that is very healthy. So I've always tried to do those things. It's very time consuming and it's laborious, but it's actually fantastic because then you build great culture within teams and great trust.
I'll make a very quick point, which is to push on the question a little bit, which is a lovely one, but I think there's a slight difference between values alignment and like-minded thinking. And so what I hear from both the answers as well, which I agree with, is actually preserving your values lens consistently is perfectly good. But that may bring people who disagree with you, and that's perfectly good. So I remember in my last organization, one of my close colleagues was I'm a very pro-Remain, really struggled with the results of 2016 Brexit referendum. He was really pro-Brexit, but he was really values aligned. So I didn't shun him. I really tried to understand his perspective. So it isn't necessarily the echo chamber of the Remain bubble or the Brexit bubble or whatever, but the values alignment consistency is a good thing to preserve, because that's who you want to be and how you want to lead in the world.
And one more thing I want to add is, I think to do what both Shefali and Vinay are mentioning, you've got to have self-awareness.
Yeah, fair point.
Because you really have to be reflective of who you are, ask for feedback, know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, know what your beliefs are, and then be able to surround yourself with people who are different from you. Because if you are not self-aware, you won't know what are the strengths and the deficiencies that you have to be able to surround yourself with the right people.
Fantastic. We have another question also in the audience.
And here, so I think.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
get the mic.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So my question is that how do you measure? So we are basically weighing values here, right? We are saying certain good impacts. But so my question about like the time frame. So there are values, there are social good that will be realized in the near future, and there are some that will be realized only, maybe like slightly further. I don't know, like 50 years from now. So when you're an investor, you have a pool of resources available for those companies or like initiatives doing social good. Like how do you weigh between, like in the time frame, like closer to us or like further from us? And I guess like also on an individual perspective, say if you're in an institution or if you're in an industry that you believe that you're not making immediate social good, you may think that, the current conditions is actually are not sufficient for you to make impact. But if you just like lie here for like a while, stay for a while, and then in the future, then there's a chance that you can make change. Like, how would you deal with that situation?
So is the question basically on time horizon?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, our fund is a 10-year fund. But, normally what's happening at the moment, if you look at private markets, most of the companies at the moment that are private are staying private for about 6 to 7 years. And so one would imagine that in between the year they've started to the 6 to 7 years when they either IPO or they get sold off or they acquired, that in that 7 years they've done something, they've built something, they've returned something, they've impacted someone or something. And so to your question, I mean, we're looking at it as day one. I'm not waiting for my fund to return in 10 years or the company to go private or get sold or IPO'd in 7 years. I'm looking as soon as we've made the investment for there to be tangible change in the organization, whether that's product or whether that's people or whether that's planting more trees, whatever the business is, we're looking at it for an immediate return and an immediate solution and impact event. I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to wait for 2 years and see how they do and then take them for another coffee. No, but you want to do it as soon as possible so that you know and you can value it on an ongoing basis.
I have a slightly different take, which is, I also trained as an economist, so my answer is, it depends. Because it kind of depends your vantage point. You could be an infrastructure fund, and you say you have a 50-year horizon,
Yeah,
you have a 10-year fund, and so therefore you want to sort of see that. So I would almost sort of say, rather than the what, it's the how that you should be really driven by. So, how are you trying to do that? If you may choose to join an infrastructure fund that is really looking at supporting, infrastructure in the global south, and actually that has a much longer, but that really aligns with what you want to sort of see, you think is critical, green jobs, whatever it is that you may have. Or some, I run Lightful, it's a B Corp, and we really look at much more immediacy around what are we doing in all the nonprofits we train, build their digital capacity, like what's happening, ROI of the impact and so on. But that sort of just happens to be what my theory of change or my approach of what I do is. So I would say, and it's kind of to your second question, I think the paradigm that you were a little bit, again, I don't know why I'm respectfully pushing back in the questions, but I'll do it again. I don't know if there's make some money and then give it away later. Again, I would encourage you to think in the work that you do, the employer that you choose to work for, the organization you choose to set up. You could be an entrepreneur, you could be pushing back on, where the endowment is invested, you could be pushing on, the management team and the authentic diversity that exists there, etc. So I think it's kind of the who you are and how you want to be is a really vital point. And then actually it's just more sort of building blocks that come on top of it. That's how I think about it.
I mean, my perspective on this is it depends on who you are. And I have a philosophy that all of you need to be in one category because of who you are and the opportunities that you've had. So I think that you can afford to work on short-term problems if perhaps you haven't had the privilege. But if you are privileged enough to be in a Rhodes Scholarship, or to have gone, to be alive, to have had education, to have, have powerful networks, then you should not be solving easy problems. Otherwise, you don't deserve the privilege that you've had. So one of the things that we talk about in the African Leadership Group is when you walk into all our campuses, there's a sign that says, do hard things, which is a reminder that if you have this privilege, then it's your responsibility. The only way you can justify this privilege is by solving big problems, hard problems. And most of those problems, you will not live to see the full impact of the solution. So for example, in the African Leadership Group, we give all of our young leaders an article to read about how the cathedrals were built. Today you go to Milan and you see this beautiful cathedral and we admire it and so forth. But it took 400 years to build. So you would have started working on the cathedral, you come to your lifetime, you just got to the foundation. And then someone else comes and builds it and it gets to this wall and so on. And then finally after 400 years again. So if you are working on a problem that you're going to see the full impact of right now, then you're not working on difficult enough problems. And so you should I would say, be patient, pick a big problem, and then work on it and align yourself with investors who have that long-term horizon. And in doing so, for example, in my organization, I've not taken any investors who are venture capitalists. I only work with family offices, people who have a 10, 20-year horizon because I'm working on a very long-term problem. And I believe that all of you in this room, maybe you can dabble around and learn with some short-term problems, but if you're really going to justify the privilege that you've had, solve long-term big problems. And I think that society will be better for that.
What a powerful message. I think it's a perfect place for us to close the session. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.